There are moments in life when everything quietly falls apart, not with noise or drama, but with waiting. Waiting that stretches longer than hope. Waiting that tests your motivation, your strength, your sense of purpose. We live in a world that celebrates speed, yet most healing happens slowly, in silence, where no one is watching. This is a story about patience, not the passive kind, but the quiet power that holds you steady when nothing seems to move. A story that reminds us that growth is happening even when the ground looks still. In a small town where seasons mattered more than clocks, there lived a man named Elias Moreno. He was a gardener by trade, but more than that, he was a man learning, slowly, painfully, what it means to trust the journey when results refuse to appear. This story will show you why peace often arrives only after we stop rushing the soil. Elias Moreno woke every morning before the sun, not because he had to, but because he believed discipline was the quiet language life understood best. The town where he lived was small, wrapped in slow roads and familiar faces. Seasons mattered there. People noticed when the air changed, when the soil softened, when the birds returned. Elias fit into that rhythm like an old habit. He was known as the gardener, the man whose hands always smelled like earth, whose nails were never clean, whose back bent not from weakness but from years of careful work. To Elias, patience was something you practiced so results could arrive faster. He didn't say it out loud, but he believed it deeply. If I do everything right, life should meet me halfway. His garden sat behind a modest house, bordered by a low wooden fence he had built himself. Every bed was measured, every seed planted at the right depth, watered at the same hour each day. Elias kept notes, dates, weather patterns, small observations that only someone paying close attention would notice. This was his world. Order, effort, progress. And for a long time, it worked. People admired his discipline. Neighbors asked for advice. Children leaned over the fence to watch him work. Elias felt useful, purposeful. He believed that growth was something you could earn if you showed up consistently enough. But beneath that belief lived a quiet tension. Elias struggled with waiting. When sprouts took longer than expected, he checked the soil too often. When leaves yellowed slightly, he adjusted everything at once: water, shade, nutrients. Afraid that stillness meant failure, he mistook urgency for care, control for responsibility. Inside him was a restlessness he never named. He had learned early in life that effort was safety. Growing up, uncertainty had made him anxious, so he built a world where outcomes felt predictable. Gardening gave him proof that patience worked, or so he thought. He believed patience was simply delayed reward, not a state of trust. At night, after the tools were cleaned and lined up just right, Elias would sit on the back steps and look at the rows of soil. He imagined what they would become. He measured progress not in peace, but in visible results. And when nothing changed, something inside him tightened. You might recognize this feeling, that quiet pressure to see something happen. That belief that if you're doing everything right, life shouldn't take this long. Elias didn't know it yet, but his journey wasn't about growing plants. It was about learning the difference between patience and control, between tending and forcing, between trusting time and fighting it. Beneath the soil, seeds were resting, not failing, not delayed, just waiting. And so was he. Spring arrived gently that year, almost politely, as if it didn't want to disturb anything. The mornings grew softer. The air carried a new scent, wet soil mixed with something hopeful. Elias noticed before anyone else. He always did. Tiny green tips began breaking through the surface of the garden beds. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to be seen if you were looking closely. Elias was. Each morning he crouched low, inspecting the soil like a quiet ritual. The first sprouts filled him with a deep, private satisfaction. This was proof. Proof that discipline worked. Proof that his effort mattered. Proof that patience, his version of it, was being rewarded. He adjusted his routine with care. Watering became more precise. Shade was measured. He spoke less, worked more. The garden responded, slowly but surely. Leaves widened, stems strengthened. Color returned to spaces that had been bare for months. Neighbors stopped by more often now. They praised his work, admired the symmetry, the health of the plants. Elias nodded politely, but inside, something warmed. He felt seen, useful, aligned with purpose. In these moments, motivation came easily. Healing, he believed, came from progress. The garden became his mirror. When things grew, he felt calm. When they stalled, he felt restless. Still, success was, undeniable. By early summer, the beds were full, the soil dark and alive. Elias kept his notes diligently, but he relied more on instinct now. Confidence had replaced caution. He believed he had learned the lesson. Be patient. Do the work. Results will follow. What Elias didn't notice was how his patience had changed shape. It had become conditional. He was patient as long as growth followed his expectations, as long as time behaved the way he thought it should. He didn't see the flaw because it was subtle. When a plant leaned slightly, he corrected it immediately. When a leaf curled, he intervened before understanding why. He believed attention meant control, and control meant care, but nature, quietly, was doing something else. Deep beneath the surface, roots were spreading unevenly. Some plants were growing faster than others. Some were struggling for reasons Elias couldn't see. The balance was delicate, and the season was changing in ways no notebook could predict. Elias stood in the garden one evening, watching the light fall across the leaves. He felt proud, grounded, certain. For the first time in a long while, he believed he was ahead of life, not behind it. Yet patience is not proven in moments of growth. It is revealed when growth pauses or disappears. And Elias had not yet learned how to wait without gripping the future too tightly. The garden was alive. So was his hope. And both were more fragile than he knew. The change came quietly. No storm announced it. No warning arrived with thunder or broken fences. One morning, Elias stepped into the garden and felt something was wrong before he saw it. The air was heavy, still. A few leaves lay curled at the base of their stems. Others had lost their color, fading into a tired yellow that didn't belong to summer. Elias knelt, touching the soil. It felt damp. Too damp. He frowned, already retracing his steps in his mind. Maybe he had watered too much. Maybe the heat had been uneven. Maybe he had missed something small, something crucial. He adjusted quickly. He always did. But the garden didn't respond. Over the next few days, the signs multiplied. Stems weakened, growth slowed, then stopped. What had once felt alive now seemed hesitant, fragile, uncertain. Elias spent longer hours outside, changing routines, adding supports, removing leaves that looked beyond saving. Nothing worked. And then came the loss. A stretch of unexpected weather, days of relentless heat followed by sudden cold, hit the town harder than anyone predicted. The soil cracked, then flooded. Roots that had grown shallow struggled to adapt. Entire sections of the garden collapsed in silence. Elias stood there, hands on his hips, unable to move. Years of discipline, months of effort, all undone by forces he could not control. The pain wasn't just in the loss of the plants, it was in what the loss said to him. If effort doesn't guarantee results, then what does? Neighbors came by, offering sympathy. Some spoke of bad seasons, of things beyond anyone's control. Elias listened without hearing. Their words slid past him, unable to reach the place where his identity had cracked. He replayed every decision, every watering, every adjustment, every moment he might have acted too fast or not fast enough. At night, sleep escaped him. His mind circled the same questions again and again, searching for a reason that would make the failure acceptable. But nature gave no explanation. The garden, once his proof of purpose, now felt like an accusation. Each withered plant whispered doubt. Each empty space reminded him of how fragile certainty truly was. For the first time in years, Elias avoided the garden. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Because standing there made him feel powerless. Failure has a way of stripping things down. It removes the comfort of control. It exposes the beliefs we didn't know we were standing on. Elias had believed patience meant waiting until things worked. Now he faced a harder truth. Sometimes patience is required after everything falls apart, and he was not ready for that kind. Elias couldn't let go. Even after the worst of the damage was clear, even after the season had turned against him, he kept returning to the garden as if something might reverse itself if he stared long enough. He pulled up dead plants slowly, reluctantly, leaving roots in the ground longer than necessary, as if removing them completely would make the loss final. He told himself he was being thorough, but deep down, he was bargaining. He reread his notes obsessively. Weather patterns, soil conditions, small decisions that once felt insignificant now carried unbearable weight. Every page became evidence in a quiet trial where Elias was both judge and accused. If I had waited one more day, if I had acted sooner, if I had trusted the process instead of interfering. Guilt wrapped itself around him, tightening with every thought. The garden no longer felt like a place of peace. It became a museum of what had been. Rows of emptiness, broken stems, unfinished potential. Elias couldn't bring himself to clear it fully. Leaving parts untouched felt like respect, or maybe punishment. Days passed, then weeks. He avoided neighbors now. Their kindness made him uncomfortable. Their reassurance felt dismissive, as if they were asking him to move on too quickly. Elias believed that letting go meant admitting his effort hadn't been enough, and that felt unbearable. He stayed busy, but without direction. Tools were cleaned again and again. Beds were adjusted, though nothing was planted. He worked the soil without purpose, trying to restore control through movement alone. But control, once broken, doesn't return easily. Inside him, something hardened. He stopped trusting time, stopped trusting seasons, stopped trusting himself. You see, letting go isn't just about release. It's about surrendering the version of yourself that needed a specific outcome to feel whole. Elias wasn't ready to do that. At night, he dreamed of the garden as it once was, green, full, alive. He woke with a sense of urgency, as if he had missed something again, as if waiting had cost him everything. But the truth was quieter. He wasn't failing because he waited too long. He was hurting because he didn't know how to wait without attachment. And until he learned that, no new seed could survive. The ground needed rest. So did he. But Elias was still gripping the past, afraid that if he loosened his hold, nothing would remain. The garden fell silent. Not the peaceful silence Elias once cherished, but a hollow one. Empty, unfinished. Days grew shorter, mornings colder. The soil hardened, untouched, as if it had closed itself off from expectation. Elias stopped rising before the sun. There was no urgency now, no routine pulling him forward. Without the garden to tend, time lost its shape. Hours drifted, days blurred. He ate when he remembered, slept when exhaustion finally overpowered his thoughts. Isolation crept in slowly. Friends assumed he needed space. Neighbors stopped asking questions. The town moved on in its quiet way, but Elias felt left behind, as if life had continued without him, indifferent to his absence. Inside, he felt empty, not sad in the dramatic sense, just numb. The kind of emptiness that makes even simple things feel heavy. He would sit on the back steps and stare at the frozen ground, hands resting in his lap, unsure what he was waiting for. This was the lowest point, not because something terrible was happening, but because nothing was. No growth, no struggle, no sense of purpose, just stillness. And yet, within that stillness, something subtle began to shift. Without distraction, Elias was forced to sit with himself, with the truth he had been avoiding. He began to see how tightly his worth had been tied to outcomes, how much he had needed success to feel at peace. Failure had stripped that away. What remained was raw, unshaped, uncertain. He felt small, human, vulnerable. This is where change becomes possible, not in action, but in awareness. When the noise stops, when the mind quiets enough to hear what has been buried beneath effort and expectation. Elias didn't know it yet, but winter wasn't punishment. It was rest. The soil wasn't dead. It was recovering. And somewhere beneath the frozen surface, something patient was waiting, not to be forced, not to be rushed, but to be honored in its own time, just like him. The encounter didn't feel important at first. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low and the world seems to move more slowly. Elias had gone for a walk, no destination in mind, just the need to leave the house. His steps led him past the edge of town, toward an old community garden that had been neglected for years. Most people passed it without noticing. An elderly man sat there, bundled in a worn coat, trimming dry branches from a small, struggling tree. His movements were slow, unhurried, careful. Elias watched from a distance. The tree looked weak, bare, almost pointless to tend this late in the season. Elias felt a familiar urge rise inside him, to explain, to advise, to fix, but he said nothing. After a while, the man looked up and smiled. "You can't rush this," he said gently, as if reading Elias's thoughts. Elias hesitated, then stepped closer. "It doesn't look like it's doing very well." The man nodded. "It isn't, but it will. How can you be sure?" The man paused, hands resting on the shears. "Because I'm not asking it to grow right now." The words settled between them. He explained that the tree had been damaged years ago, or people had tried to save it with fertilizers, heavy pruning, constant attention. It only weakened further. So he stopped. He let it rest, protected it from harsh weather, tended it only when necessary. "Growth isn't always visible," the man said. "Sometimes it's happening where you can't see it." Elias felt something loosen in his chest. The man wasn't speaking with authority or urgency. There was no lesson being forced, just observation, acceptance. As Elias walked home later, the words echoed quietly. "I'm not asking it to grow right now." Patience, he realized, wasn't waiting with tension. It was allowing without demand. For the first time since the failure, Elias felt a hint of peace. Not because things had changed, but because his understanding had. He didn't need to fix everything. He didn't need to rush healing. He just needed to stop fighting time. That night, Elias slept deeply. Winter remained. The garden was still empty, but something inside him had begun to thaw. Elias returned to his garden the next morning with a different energy. Not urgency, not expectation, just presence. He didn't bring seeds. He didn't bring plans. He brought a broom. Slowly, he cleared fallen leaves. He mended the loose fence where the wood had shifted from the cold. He straightened tools that had been left untouched for weeks. None of it was about preparing for growth. It was about respect for the space, for the time, for himself. This time, he didn't rush. He worked in silence, noticing details he had once ignored: the texture of the soil, the sound of his breath, the way his hands moved when they weren't trying to control an outcome. When he knelt, he didn't dig deep. He didn't disturb the earth unnecessarily. He remembered the words of the old man. "I'm not asking it to grow right now." Instead, Elias focused on care without demand. He covered certain beds to protect them from the cold. He composted what remained instead of throwing it away, accepting that even loss could become nourishment. He allowed the garden to look unfinished. That was the hardest part, letting things be incomplete without labeling them as failure. Days turned into weeks. Elias rebuilt his routine slowly. Mornings returned, but without pressure. He walked. He worked lightly. He rested without guilt. Healing didn't arrive as a dramatic moment. It came quietly, like breath returning after holding it too long. Elias noticed changes within himself. He no longer checked the soil every hour. He no longer imagined the future constantly. He began to trust that stillness had value. Patience, he learned, was a form of strength. Not the strength that pushes forward, but the strength that holds space. This wasn't rebirth yet. It was preparation. Like roots growing deeper before any leaf appears. And for the first time, Elias wasn't afraid of how long it might take. Just when Elias began to feel steady again, impatience returned, quietly, convincingly. Spring teased the edges of the town. The air softened. Birds came back. The soil, once hard and distant, loosened beneath his fingers. Signs appeared everywhere, whispering the same question: "Isn't it time now?" Elias felt it in his chest, the familiar urge to act, to plant, to move faster than the season asked of him. He told himself it was wisdom this time, not restlessness. He had waited long enough. He had learned his lesson. Or so he thought. He stood over the garden beds with seed packets in his hands, imagining the outcome before the work had even begun. The old pattern tried to return. Anticipation disguised as purpose, urgency dressed up as motivation. This was the new struggle. Not failure, not loss, but the temptation to rush healing because it finally felt possible again. Elias hesitated. He remembered how confident he had once been, how sure that effort alone could bend time in his favor. He remembered how quickly that certainty had collapsed, and he understood something important in that moment. Patience is not proven when we are tired of waiting. It is proven when waiting becomes uncomfortable again. He put the seeds down, not because he was afraid, but because he was listening. Instead, Elias tested the soil gently. He observed the light patterns. He watched how water moved through the ground after rain. He paid attention, not to speed things up, but to understand them. Some days he did nothing at all, and that was the hardest discipline of all. There were moments he doubted himself, moments when doing nothing felt lazy, when he questioned whether patience had turned into avoidance. But each time he returned to the same grounding truth. Growth follows readiness, not desire. Slowly, he began planting again. Not everywhere, not all at once. One bed, a few seeds, with space between them, with room for error, with acceptance that some might not grow, and that would be okay. Old habits knocked at the door, but Elias didn't let them in fully. He felt impatience rise, acknowledged it, then let it pass without acting on it. This was transformation in practice. Not a perfect state, a consistent choice. Strength, Elias realized, wasn't about never struggling. It was about recognizing the struggle and responding with intention instead of impulse. The garden began to change, not dramatically, but honestly, and so did he. The garden didn't explode into life. There was no sudden transformation, no moment where everything became beautiful at once. Growth arrived the way it always had, quietly, patiently, without asking to be noticed. But this time, Elias noticed differently. He no longer measured progress by height or color alone. He paid attention to balance, to rhythm, to how the garden felt rather than how it looked. Some plants grew strong, others struggled. A few never emerged at all, and Elias let them be. Morning light returned to his routine, but not as pressure. It felt like an invitation. He worked with calm hands, unburdened by urgency. When something failed, he didn't take it personally. When something thrived, he didn't cling to it. The garden breathed, and so did he. Peace settled into Elias's life in a way he hadn't expected. Not excitement, not pride, just a steady sense of alignment. He understood now that purpose wasn't about constant forward motion. It was about being present with whatever stage you were in. Neighbors noticed the change. They commented on the garden, yes, but more on Elias himself. He smiled more easily, listened more than he spoke. There was a lightness in him, a softness that came from no longer fighting time. He had learned that patience wasn't waiting for life to begin. Life was already happening. Failure had not ruined him. Waiting had not wasted him. Letting go had not emptied him. It had reshaped him. Elias stood one evening at the edge of the garden, watching the sky deepen into dusk. The soil was dark and alive beneath his feet. He felt gratitude, not for perfection, but for continuity, for the chance to begin again without force. This was the new dawn. Not a reward at the end of suffering, but a quiet understanding that peace comes when we stop demanding that life move faster than it should. The journey had given him something far more valuable than control. It had given him trust. And now, the story turns gently toward you. Because somewhere in Elias's journey there is a reflection of your own. There are seasons in life when you do everything right, and still, nothing grows. When motivation feels strong, discipline is present, effort is consistent, and yet the results don't arrive on time. In those moments, it's easy to believe something is wrong with you, but patience is not a punishment, it is preparation. Elias learned that waiting does not mean weakness. It means trusting that healing is happening even when you cannot see it, that roots grow in darkness long before leaves reach the light. He learned that control often disguises itself as care, and that true strength is the ability to loosen your grip without losing your commitment. Letting go is not giving up, it is choosing peace over fear. Failure, too, revealed its deeper purpose. It stripped away the belief that worth comes from outcomes alone. It taught him that rebirth does not require speed, only honesty. The journey showed him that discipline is not about forcing progress, but about showing up with consistency, even when the work feels invisible. That purpose unfolds when we stop rushing the timeline and start respecting the season we are in. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, you are not late, you are not behind, you are not broken. You are in a season. Some seasons ask you to build, some ask you to release, some ask you to rest, and all of them are necessary. So if you are waiting right now, waiting for clarity, for healing, for a breakthrough, know this: the soil is working, even when it looks still. Your patience is not empty time. It is the quiet space where transformation begins. Trust the journey. Honor the pace. Let growth arrive when it's ready. If this story resonated with you, carry it forward. Share it with someone who might need it. And if you wish to hear more stories like this, stories that remind us of our strength, our humanity, and our capacity for rebirth, stay connected. The next season will come, and you will be ready.